They sent their ultimatum to the wrong admiral. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the indefatigable Ledger, her flagship a vessel of doctrine as much as steel. Before her, the tactical display painted a stark reality. The cobalt blue icons of her Fifth Fleet were a paltry shield for the emerald green glow of Sanctuary, a world of 30 million souls. Encircling them all, a crimson slash of hegemony warships pulsed with arrogant power. The ultimatum's clock hung in the upper right corner of the main screen, a number that bled away seconds with chilling precision. 4 hours until they either surrendered their ally or witnessed its annihilation. Prax's status on the hegemony's doctrine profile. Rostova said, her voice a low anchor in the quiet hum of the bridge. The air tasted of clean, recycled oxygen and the faint scent of ozone from the humming consoles. Her fleet mind's synthesized voice, calm and measured, filled the space. Unchanged, Admiral. The Vexillum Imperium operates on a 99.7% adherence to the doctrine of inflexible will. An ultimatum once issued is never rescinded. They will fire. The console beside her shimmered, reflecting the grim set of her jaw. The fleet mind was right, of course. Its logic was as flawless as it was merciless. They believe it is a strength, Rostova murmured, her gaze fixed on the enemy formation. They see it as a tool of order. A young ensign at the communications hub looked over her face, pale with the tension that vibrated through the ship's very deck plates. Rostova offered a small, steady nod. They will learn it is a cage. On the surface of Sanctuary, a schoolteacher named Alara guided her young students into a hardened subterranean shelter. The children clutched worn data slates and stuffed animals, their wide eyes reflecting the unnatural twilight of the planet's emergency defense shields. One small boy, clutching a toy starship modeled after the Ledger, looked up at her. "Is Admiral Rostova going to make the red ships go away?" he asked, his voice trembling only slightly. Alara knelt, smoothing his hair. "The Admiral is very good at math," she said softly. "She always makes sure the numbers add up." Back on the bridge, Tactical Officer Jin keyed in a final sequence. "Admiral, the convoy is formed. 94 civilian transports fully shielded awaiting your mark. They are anxious." The vibration underfoot was a constant reminder of the fusion cores holding them in this precarious orbit, a whisper of immense power held in check. "Anxiety is a rational response," Lieutenant Rostova said. "Prax, are the mirror lattices fully spooled?" "Affirmative. All 1,024 drones are in position, awaiting deployment sequence," the AI confirmed. "Their energy signatures are masked, appearing as standard sensor ghosts. Probability of hegemony detection remains below 3%. This was their first gamble, a complex shell game of light and energy. "They have us pinned against the gravity well," Jin added, his fingers tracing the projected vectors. "Their firing solution is optimal. They don't even have to aim. They just have to miss the planet." The consul's glare highlighted the sweat on his brow. It was a perfectly executed threat. "They believe their position is unassailable," Rostova stated, her eyes narrowing. "They see a fleet guarding a planet. They don't see a board state. Prax, give me the primary deception overlay." The main display shifted and shimmering lines of code and energy projections cascaded over the tactical map. It was a phantom, a ghost fleet designed to draw fire and attention. "The hegemony battle net is consuming our ghost data packets at the expected rate," Prax reported. "Their automated targeters are assigning priority values to our decoy signatures. They are preparing to solve a problem we have invented for them." The deception was taking hold, a lie told in the language of energy and light. Rostova watched the enemy's tight formation. It was a blockade born of supreme confidence, a wall of guns that expected a head-on assault or a meek surrender. They had no category for an enemy who refused to play by their rules, who treated a battlefield like a ledger book waiting to be balanced. Hold the line, Mr. Jin. Let them commit to their own certainty. Their certainty was the real target. The countdown timer ticked below 3 hours and 45 minutes. On board the civilian transport Starglider's Hope, a medic administered a sedative to a passenger suffering from acute anxiety. The low thrum of the transport's engines was a poor comfort against the vast silence outside. From their viewport, the crimson specks of the hegemony fleet were a constant terrifying reminder of the promise they represented. Every soul aboard knew the penalty for defiance. Rostova's gaze was locked on the enemy flagship, the unquestionable verdict. Its power signature was a roaring fire compared to her fleet's controlled burns. They're consuming fuel at an unsustainable rate to maintain that perfect stationary orbit, she observed. Pride is an expensive luxury prax. Their doctrine does not account for resource attrition in ultimatum scenarios, Admiral the AI replied. Victory is presumed to be swift, negating the need for efficiency. It is a statistically significant vulnerability. The logic was cold, but it warmed Rostova with the heat of opportunity. Mr. Barros, she called to her engineering chief. What is our heat budget looking like for the mirror deployment? Chief Barros, a man whose face was a permanent roadmap of grease stains and worry lines, checked his console. Tight, Admiral. The lattices will draw hard from the core when they activate. We'll be running hot, glowing like a damn nova on any thermal sensor that isn't looking where we tell it to look. The hiss of a coolant valve cycling somewhere deep in the ship punctuated his words. We will show them where to look. The first part of this plan was to save the innocent. The civilian convoy needed a path and escape vector that the hegemony would ignore until it was too late. Rostova tapped a command into her personal console, a flicker of light in the dim bridge. Prax initiate Phase 1. Deploy the decoy fleet. Give them a target they can't resist. Instantly, thousands of ghost signatures bloomed into existence on the hegemony's screens, a swarm of phantom energy readings that mimicked a full-scale fleet preparing for a desperate charge. The signatures were layered complex and designed to trigger every aggressive impulse in the enemy's tactical doctrine. Alarms blared across the bridge of the unquestionable verdict. Contact. Multiple contacts. Admiral, they're charging the hegemony, tactical officer yelled. Grand Marshal Kalin, a man carved from granite and arrogance, sneered at the display. A fool's charge. Predictable. They think to overwhelm our guns with numbers. He keyed his command. All ships fire at will on the primary wave. Teach them the futility of resistance. He was giving an order, but Rostova was the one pulling the strings. They were firing on shadows, as crimson lances of plasma and kinetic rounds tore through empty space, shredding phantom signals. The real maneuver began. Now Mr. Jin, Rostova commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. Open the corridor. With a few keystrokes, Jin activated the first sequence for the mirror drones. They remained cloaked, but their purpose shifted. The 1,024 drones positioned in a wide, seemingly random field began to subtly bend space-time and manipulate sensor readings in a narrow channel, a hidden corridor pointing away from the planet and the manufactured chaos. It was an invisible road, paved with refracted light and falsified data. The coolant hiss from the deck vents seemed to grow louder, a machine sighing under the strain. Convoy is away, Jin reported, his knuckles white. They are accelerating through the null sensor corridor. Hegemony sensors show that space as empty nebula gas. So far, the deception is holding. The emerald icons of the civilian ships began their slow, silent crawl toward freedom. Rostova felt the deck plate vibrate as the ledger made a micro-adjustment to its own position, anchoring the corridor's delicate geometry. They believe they are winning a battle against our fleet. They are in fact helping us evacuate. Prax finished, a rare hint of something akin to satisfaction in its synthesized tone. This is the first lesson in accounting. Grand Marshal Kalin watched the fireworks with grim approval. The human fleet's charge was pathetic, their ships vanishing in silent explosions of light on his tactical display. He had seen this 100 times before, a lesser power driven by emotion, making a fatal strategic error. The countdown clock still ticked, a reminder of the true objective. Targeting solutions on the planet remain locked, his weapons officer confirmed. Minimal deviation. The orbital bombardment will proceed on schedule. Kalen nodded, allowing a thin smile. The doctrine was perfect. It created order from chaos through the simple application of overwhelming force. But one of his sensor technicians frowned, tapping at his console. "Sir, I'm getting an odd energy fluctuation on the far side of the system. It's faint, like a residual heat signature from a mass transit." The heat shimmer was almost imperceptible on his screen. "It's sensor ghosting from the weapon's discharge." Kalen dismissed instantly. "Focus on the battle. Do not be distracted by irrelevancies." The technician subsided, but his doubt lingered. They refused to see the sums that did not suit them. Aboard the Ledger, the atmosphere was thick with controlled tension. Every officer watched their board, every eye scanning for the flicker of detection that would mean failure. The convoy was halfway through the corridor now, a silent exodus under the nose of a preoccupied giant. "Heat levels are climbing," Barros reported, his voice strained. "The mirror drones are working overtime to maintain the corridor's integrity. We're burning through our coolant reserves faster than projected." This was the first cost a tax paid in heat and risk. The ship's internal temperature rose by a noticeable degree. "Adjust power allocation," Rostova ordered without taking her eyes off the main display. "Divert non-essential energy from internal life support. Let the ship run hot. The crew can sweat for a few more minutes." She trusted them to endure, to understand the price of this maneuver. Prax's voice cut in. "Admiral, a hegemony patrol frigate on the far perimeter is changing its vector. It is moving to investigate the convoy's projected exit point. Its analytical suite has flagged the faint thermal trail as anomalous, the first crack in their perfect deception. The universe does not allow for perfect lies." "It's one ship," Jin said, his voice tight. "But if it gets a clear sensor lock and broadcasts the convoy's position, the entire enemy fleet will pivot. The corridor would become a shooting gallery. The emerald icons would be extinguished in moments." Rostova's mind raced, processing the new variable. Abandoning the convoy was not an option. Engaging the frigate directly would expose their own position and the full extent of the deception. They needed a third way, a solution that fit their doctrine. This was the first plan-changing escalation. "Prax," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Is it possible to use a single mirror drone to create a focused, localized sensor mirage? Not a fleet, just one ship. Our ship." The AI processed the request for a full 3 seconds. The hum of its processing core was a faint thrum in the air. The power draw would be immense. The targeted drone would likely burn out. The mirage would be unstable, lasting only moments. But it is theoretically possible. "Make it so," Rostova commanded. "Target the drone closest to that frigate's projected path. When the frigate is at maximum range, give it a ghost. Make it think the indefatigable Ledger itself is breaking cover to challenge it. We will teach them to fear our ghosts." The lone hegemony frigate, the Inquisitor's eye sliced through the void. Its captain, a junior officer eager to prove his worth, watched his sensor screen intently. The anomaly was real, a trail of displaced particles and faint heat that did not belong. He was on the verge of a discovery that would surely earn him a commendation from the Grand Marshal himself. Then his ship screamed. Alarms blared as a massive energy signature bloomed directly in his path. It was a human capital ship, its transponder screaming the name Indefatigable Ledger. It was impossible. The flagship was on the other side of the planet, engaged in a suicidal charge. "Evasive maneuvers. Hard to port," the captain shrieked. The frigate veered violently, its engines flaring as it scrambled to escape the Ghost's projected weapon range. The illusion held for 17 seconds, a perfect, terrifying mirage of a cornered beast lashing out. Then, as the mirror drone overloaded and died, the image flickered and vanished. The frigate captain stared at his blank screen, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had faced the enemy flagship alone and survived. He immediately opened a priority channel to the unquestionable verdict. His fear had become their blindness. Grand Marshal Kalen listened to the frigate captain's frantic report with contempt. "You saw a sensor ghost, Captain, a product of their electronic warfare. You abandoned your patrol route out of cowardice." The captain's panicked voice crackled over the comms. "But sir, the energy readings they were perfect." "They were a lie," Kalen snapped, cutting the channel. "Return to your station." He turned to his tactical officer. "The humans are becoming more desperate. Their deceptions are growing more elaborate." He glanced at the countdown, 02:15:00. The end was approaching. He would not be distracted. But the seed of the idea had been planted. The human flagship was using advanced projection technology. The charge he was witnessing might be part of a larger, more complex deception. He was still certain of his victory, but a sliver of uncertainty had been introduced into his perfect doctrinal calculus. Meanwhile, the civilian convoy slipped past the now vacant patrol point and vanished into the safety of hyperspace. 94 ships, millions of lives saved without a single shot fired from Rostova's fleet. The first part of the ledger was balanced. "Convoy is clear." Admiral Jin reported a wave of relief washing over the bridge. A few quiet cheers broke out before being silenced by a glance from the command staff. Phase 1 complete. At a cost, Barros added his board flashing red. "We lost drone 734, and the rest of the lattice is running at 150% thermal capacity. They need to cool Admiral or we risk a cascade failure." The scent of hot metal seemed to creep into the recycled air. "Steady the line. The reckoning is not yet complete." "Let them cool," Rostova ordered. "Retract the mirror drones to passive mode. Let the hegemony think their phantom battle is over." The tactical display simplified the thousands of ghost signatures winking out of existence. On Kalen's bridge, it looked like the final pathetic destruction of the human attack wave. "The charge has been broken, Grand Marshal," his officer reported with a smug grin. "They threw everything they had at us. Nothing remains." Kalen nodded, the thin smile returning to his lips. The doctrine had held. The ultimatum was unassailable. Now Kalen said, his voice resonating with absolute authority. "They have wasted our time. Let us remind them of the price of defiance. Target the planet's primary orbital infrastructure. We will begin the bombardment ahead of schedule." Rostova watched the enemy fleet shift its formation, their main guns turning slowly, malevolently, toward the glowing emerald sphere of sanctuary. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The deception was complete. The trap was set. "They believe the board is cleared." Prax Rostova said, her voice calm as the void. "They're taking the bait. The Grand Marshal is moving his fleet into the designated kill box." The space the hegemony now occupied was the very channel they had just used to evacuate the convoy. It was a clear, open corridor, perfect for concentrating their firepower on the planet below. All hegemony vessels are now within the optimal resonance field of the mirror lattice Prax confirmed. Their current trajectory aligns perfectly with the parameters of the reflected judgment protocol. The hum of the ship felt different now, not a sound of strain, but of anticipation. The fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Rostova quoted the core tenet of her service. It was a promise to the universe that they would be accountants of justice, not enforcers of tyranny. This was the moment to prove it. "All ships," she commanded, her voice ringing with newfound steel. "Bring the mirror lattice back online. Full power to all drones. It's time to settle this account. A wave of energy surged through the ledger, a deep thrum that vibrated up from the soles of her boots. It is time to show them what a mirror can do. Grand Marshal Kalen raised his hand to give the final order. On my mark, commence orbital. His voice was cut off by a piercing alarm from the sensor station. Sir, massive energy surge all around us. It's the drones. They're not decoys, they're... Before the officer could finish, the void outside the unquestionable verdict's viewport changed. The 1,023 remaining drones, which had been invisible, suddenly blazed with borrowed light. They formed a perfect system-spanning parabolic cage of pure energy, their crystalline structures aligning with terrifying precision. They were not weapons. They were mirrors, and they were all aimed directly at Kalen's fleet. What is this? Kalen breathed, staring in disbelief. What is the meaning of this trickery? On the ledger's bridge, Rostova stood as if carved from stone. Prax. Open a channel to the Hegemony Flagship. Audio only. A moment of truth deserves a voice. Grand Marshal Kalen Rostova's voice echoed across the bridge of the unquestionable verdict, calm and clear as a bell. You have built your doctrine on the principle of the ultimatum. A simple binary choice: submit or be destroyed. You have used it to terrorize 100 worlds. Kalen's face contorted with rage. You dare lecture me, human? Your fleet is broken. Your tricks are at an end. Fire, he roared at his weapons officer. I cannot, sir, the officer cried, his hands flying over a dead console. Our targeting systems. They're not responding. They're receiving. Our own targeting data. What you failed to appreciate, Marshal Rostova continued, her voice unwavering, is that an ultimatum is a mirror. It reflects the character of the one who issues it. Today you will face your own reflection. The mirror lattice pulsed, its energy resonating. The air on Kalen's bridge crackled with static. A low, whining sound began to fill the silence, the sound of immense power being gathered and focused. The ledger is open. The balance is due. The weapons you are about to fire, Rostova explained, have been retargeted. Not by me. Not by my fleet. By your own signals, captured and perfectly reflected by the lattice surrounding you. Every shot you take at Sanctuary will be returned to its source. The second escalation had arrived. The trap was not just sprung, it was a lesson in physics and philosophy. The hegemony's own doctrine of inflexible will was about to be turned against them with mathematical perfection. Kalen stared at his tactical display. 1,000 tiny lines now connected his ships to each other. His perfect wall of guns had become a circular firing squad. The corridor he had chosen for his bombardment had become a cage of his own making. This is your ultimatum, Marshal Rostova's voice concluded. You have presented Sanctuary with a choice. Now I present you with one. Hold your fire and stand down. Or, complete the fire control sequence and execute your own fleet. The choice was his. The countdown timer for his original ultimatum still ticked, now a monument to his own folly. A debt is a promise that must be kept. The bridge of the unquestionable verdict was a tomb of silent horror. Every officer understood the geometry of the trap. Their doctrine, their inflexible will, demanded they fire. To do otherwise was to admit defeat, to break the core tenet of their entire civilization. But to fire was suicide. She's bluffing, Kalen whispered, though he knew it was a lie. The energy readings were undeniable. The physics was sound. It's a trick, an illusion. But his hand hesitated over the firing stud. For the first time in his decorated career, he was uncertain. Statistical analysis suggests a 92% probability that he will attempt to find a flaw in the lattice Prax, stated coolly on the ledger's bridge. He will likely order a single ship to fire a low-yield test shot. Let him, Rostova replied. One of the core principles of teaching is allowing the student to test the hypothesis. Mr. Jin, isolate the energy signature of the frigate at grid 49er. I believe its captain is eager to please. the console glare reflected in her steady eyes. As if on cue, Kalen gave the order. Inquisitor's eye. Fire a single ranging shot at the planet's upper atmosphere. Let us expose this human lie. They chose to learn the hard way. The young captain of the Inquisitor's eye, the same one who had panicked before, now saw a chance for redemption. He complied instantly. A thin, searing beam of coherent energy lanced out from his ship, a pale imitation of the volley that was to come. It sped toward Sanctuary for less than a microsecond. Then the mirror lattice did its work. The beam struck the invisible parabolic wall and with flawless efficiency was reflected. It returned along the exact same path, amplified by resonant harmonics within the lattice itself. Before the frigate's crew could even register the reflection on their sensors, their own shot slammed back into their vessel. The Inquisitor's eye didn't explode. It simply vanished. The returned beam magnified, overloaded every system, vaporized the hull, and detonated the ship's ammunition stores in a single silent flash of white-hot light. One crimson icon on the hegemony tactical display blinked and disappeared. A gasp swept through Kalen's bridge. The cost was now tangible, written in fire and vacuum. Prax Rostova said softly. Update the board. On the main screen of the ledger, a new entry appeared in a column labeled Reckoning. It was a simple, stark equation showing one hegemony frigate, its crew complement, and the single shot it had fired. A perfectly balanced entry. Their own violence was the weapon, silence. A profound, echoing silence filled the comm channel between the two flagships. Grand Marshal Kalen stared at the empty space where his frigate had been. He had given the order. He had destroyed one of his own ships. The doctrine of inflexible will offered no guidance for a scenario where the enemy's weapon was your own trigger finger. Marshal Rostova's voice returned devoid of triumph, filled only with a weary gravity. The lesson is complete. The proof is rendered. Your ultimatum is a failed doctrine, a snake that eats its own tail. The next choice is yours, all of yours. Her message was now being broadcast across all hegemony channels, a direct appeal to every captain in the fleet. The crews on the hegemony ships looked at their commanders, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. They were trapped not by an enemy's guns, but by their own commander's pride. The ultimatum clock read 00:45:10. It was no longer a threat to Sanctuary. It was a self-destruct timer for the Vexillum Imperium. He is now facing a choice, not between victory and defeat, Prax analyzed, but between personal humiliation and fleet-wide annihilation. His psychological profile suggests he is incapable of choosing the former. Then we must give his crew a reason to choose for him, Rostova replied. Brace for the fracture. She keyed in another command. Prax begin Phase 3. Use the lattice to project data, not energy. Open a public ledger. Show every ship in their fleet the cost of their doctrine, not just here, but everywhere. The mirror drones shifted their function again. Their light coalesced into vast, shimmering screens in the void, positioned so every hegemony ship had a clear view. Numbers began to scroll across the screens. Not tactical data, but names, worlds, population figures, the civilian casualties from 100 other ultimatums, 100 other worlds that had no Fifth Fleet to protect them. It was a history of atrocity displayed for the entire system to see written in light and truth. The names of the dead tallied against the dates of hegemony ultimatums. On the bridge of the unquestionable verdict, the officers stared at the impossible projections. They saw names, they recognized campaigns they had participated in, reframed not as glorious victories, but as sterile, brutal massacres. The foundation of their pride, their inflexible will, began to crack. A low murmur spread through the hegemony bridge, a sound of dissent Kalen had never heard before. "This is human propaganda," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Lies disable our receivers. But no one moved. They were transfixed by the glowing ledger in the stars. The truth is the only weapon that never misses. Your doctrine requires you to witness the consequences of your actions, Marshal Rostova's voice explained. This is the accounting. This is the bill for your empire of fear. Your crews see it. The wider galaxy will see it. The choice is no longer just yours to make. The final mystery was now revealed. The mirror lattice was never primarily a weapon. It was a communications device, a truth teller, a way to hold up a reflection so perfect, so undeniable that it forced self-assessment. Its purpose was to teach, and if that failed to enforce the lesson with the subject's own misapplied force. A red light flashed on Jin's console. Admiral, multiple hegemony ships are powering down their main weapon systems. They're breaking formation. The Crimson Wall was crumbling from within. Captains faced with the truth of their past and the suicidal absurdity of their present were making their own choice. They were disobeying the Grand Marshal. He's lost control, Jin breathed, watching the chaos unfold on the tactical display. The hegemony fleet was dissolving into a collection of individual ships, no longer a unified instrument of terror. The doctrine of inflexible will had proven to be fatally brittle, but Kalen was not finished. His face was a mask of pure nihilistic rage. He had been shamed. His authority had been shattered. If he was to fall, he would not fall alone. He shoved his own weapons officer aside, his eyes locked on the planet's sanctuary. If I cannot have victory, he snarled, his hand slamming down on the master firing control for his own ship, the unquestionable verdict, then I will have an end. His flagship, the most powerful vessel in the hegemony fleet, unleashed its full firepower. A torrent of incandescent energy, a wave of apocalyptic destruction erupted from its cannons. It was not aimed at any ship. It was aimed at the lattice itself, a final, spiteful act of a broken man. Hold the mirror steady. Prax, all power to the forward lattice array, Rostova commanded, her hands gripping the console. Reinforce the focal point. We are going to return this to sender. The hum of the ledger rose to a piercing shriek as every spare watt of power was diverted to the mirror drones. The ship's lights flickered and dimmed under the strain. The incoming blast from the unquestionable verdict was a tide of raw power that threatened to overwhelm the system. The mirror drones at the focal point glowed, their crystalline structures heating to the breaking point under the immense energy load. The cost of this final act was mounting a second more severe price paid in stressed metal and vaporized coolant. For a heart-stopping moment, the lattice buckled. A flicker of energy, a sliver of the beam leaked through, scoring a long, molten scar across the hull of one of Rostova's cruisers, the Resolute. Alarms blared as damage control teams scrambled. Wounded but alive, the cruiser held its position. Then the mirror stabilized. It caught the full, furious onslaught of Kalen's rage and held it. The energy of a dying star was contained and focused into a single, perfect point of light. And then, with the immutable certainty of physics, it was sent back. The reflected beam was not a wide wave of destruction. It was a needle of pure sunfire, a lance of cosmic justice. It struck the unquestionable verdict dead center, piercing through its shields, its armor, its core in less than a heartbeat. Kalen had just enough time to look up from his console and see his own son coming for him. The Grand Marshal and his flagship were erased from existence in a silent final flash. Their doctrine died with their apex. The void where the hegemony flagship had been was now a rapidly expanding cloud of incandescent gas and shattered metal. The reflected beam from the mirror lattice vanished. Its purpose served. A profound quiet descended upon the system, the silence of a shouted word that has just ended, leaving only the ringing in one's ears. On the tactical display, the central crimson icon of the hegemony command was gone. The remaining ships drifted their tight formation, broken their command chain, severed at the head. They were no longer a fleet. They were a flock without a shepherd. A damage control report flashed on Rostova's console, the amber text a stark reminder of the cost. The cruiser Resolute reported hull breaches on 3 decks, 7 crew wounded, none critically. The focused energy required for the final reflection had permanently burned out an additional 57 mirror drones, leaving gaping holes in their perfect array. The ship's own power core whined with thermal stress, the deck plates beneath Rostova's boots radiating a palpable heat. This was the price of turning back a tyrant's final hateful act. "The hegemony command net is in chaos," Lieutenant Jin reported, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Multiple captains are broadcasting in the clear, demanding orders from a commander who no longer exists. They are directionless. "They are not directionless," Lieutenant Rostova corrected him gently. "They are simply free to choose a new direction." "Prax, what is the hardliner's disposition? A decapitated snake can still bite." Analysis of their comms traffic indicates 3 distinct factions forming the fleet mind stated. 62% are moving to a passive stance awaiting instruction. 19% are broadcasting surrender inquiries. The remaining 19%, a cluster of 7 heavy cruisers and their escorts, are attempting to rally under the command of the Iron Credence. Its captain, Valerius, was Kalin's senior deputy. Valerius Rostova mused, his file, a doctrinal purist admiral. He has never once deviated from a Vexillum Imperium battle plan. He sees Kalin's failure not as a flaw in the doctrine, but as a flaw in the man. The console beside Rostova displayed the profile of a grim, hard-jawed officer who looked like a younger version of Kalin. "He will see this as a moment to prove his own conviction is stronger," Rostova concluded. "He will try to finish what Kalin started." This was the 3rd escalation, the final desperate gasp of a dying creed. The faithful are always the last to abandon a fallen church. On board the Resolute, a young medic pressed a cool biofoam patch onto a crewman's plasma burn. The ship's lights were dim, running on emergency power in this section. Through a small viewport, the crewman could see the distant, beautiful shimmer of the mirror lattice, now scarred with dark patches where drones had failed. "Did we win?" he asked, his voice hoarse from inhaling superheated air. The medic looked out at the scattered, silent hegemony fleet. "The Admiral balanced the books," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, exhausted confidence. "Now we just have to collect the payment." Rostova watched the 7 hardline cruisers begin to maneuver, their engines glowing hot as they tried to form a new battle line. They were rallying their fear, solidifying back into aggression. "Prax, give me a new ultimatum. One for them." Standard surrender terms would be strategically optimal, the AI suggested. "Demand they power down weapons and prepare to be boarded." No, Rostova countered. "That is the language of conquerors. We are accountants. Our terms must reflect our purpose." She leaned forward, the light from the tactical display etching lines onto her face. "Draft this message. Hegemony Fleet, this is Admiral Rostova of the 5th Fleet. Your Grand Marshal has executed your doctrine and found it wanting. The ledger of his actions is now closed." She paused, choosing her next words with care. "You are not our prisoners. You are the inheritors of a bankrupt ideology. We offer you a choice. Power down your weapons and open your logs for audit. We will settle the account of Sanctuary together, and then you will be free to go to build something new upon the ruins of this failure. Or you may share in your Marshal's judgment. The choice is yours." It was an offer of mercy wrapped in the language of math. The message went out across all channels, a stark contrast to the brutal simplicity of Kalin's original threat. On the bridges of dozens of hegemony ships, captains who had been raised on a diet of inflexible will were suddenly presented with an off-ramp, a way out, that did not involve death or dishonor, but paperwork. It was a deeply confusing, deeply human proposition. The 19% broadcasting surrender inquiries immediately accepted the terms. Their crimson icons on the tactical display turned a neutral white, but the hardliners on the iron credence were not swayed. Captain Valerius's voice, harsh and full of static, crackled over the open channel. "We reject your twisted words, human. There is no ledger but victory. There is no justice but the fire of our cannons. The doctrine is not broken. We will show you its true strength." The 7 cruisers and their escorts accelerated not toward Sanctuary, but toward Rostova's fleet. "He intends to punch through our line and engage us at close range inside the lattice's optimal focal distance." Jin analyzed, his fingers flying across his console. "It's a desperate, brutal charge. It is the only move his doctrine allows," Rostova said. "He must escalate. He has no other tool." She looked at Prax. "The cost of a direct engagement." "High Admiral," the AI replied. "Even with our superior position, we would suffer significant damage. The Resolute is already at diminished capacity. The optimal response is to use the lattice to destroy them at range, just as we did their flagship." The AI's logic was, as always, brutally efficient. "No," Rostova said again, more firmly this time. "We did not come here to become executioners." Kalen forced our hand. "These men still have a choice, even if they refuse to see it." This was the heart of the conflict triangle, her own moral line pushing back against the cold calculus of war. "We will not become the monster we came to slay." "Mr. Barros," she called out to engineering, "what is the status of the remaining mirror drones?" Their strained admiral, the chief engineer, called back, his voice tinny over the ship's internal comm. The final reflection pushed them to their structural limits. "Another blast of that magnitude is out of the question. But they can still redirect energy if we're careful about it." The low thrum of the engines was a constant, weary groan. "Careful is what we do best," Rostova said. "Prax, new plan. I do not want to destroy them. I want to disarm them. Can we use the lattice not as a single mirror, but as a series of lenses? Can we redirect their own weapon emissions to non-critical systems? Target their main gun emitters, their engine manifolds?" The AI was silent for a full 5 seconds. The complexity of the calculation was immense. It would require rerouting power, adjusting the position of hundreds of drones in real time, and processing thousands of firing solutions per second. The processing load would be unprecedented, Prax said finally. The margin for error would be less than 0.001%. A single miscalculation could result in the destruction of the target or a full reflection back at our own ships. "I have faith in your math," Prax Rostova said simply. "Make it happen. Their weapons will become their shackles." As the hardline faction closed the distance, their forward batteries began to glow. They were preparing to fire a coordinated volley designed to saturate a single point in the mirror lattice and break through by sheer brute force. It was a textbook application of hegemony power, a final defiant scream of the old way. "They're firing," Jin warned, his voice tense. "Prax, execute," Rostova commanded. "Aboard the Iron Credence, Captain." Valerius shouted the order. "Fire, fire, and shatter their glass toys." Lances of crimson energy erupted from his 7 cruisers, converging on a single point in space. It was a torrent of power, a hammer blow meant to crush the fly that had annoyed them. But the fly was not there. In the instant before the beams converged, the mirror lattice shifted. The drones did not reflect. They refracted. They bent the light. The single overwhelming hammer blow was caught, split into 1,000 constituent threads, and woven into a delicate, deadly web. Each thread was then guided with impossible precision. The crimson beams did not return to the ships that fired them. Instead, the beam from the Iron Credence was redirected to strike the primary weapon emitter of its sister ship, the Righteous Blade. The Righteous Blade's shot was in turn redirected to melt the engine housing of the final word. Ship by ship, shot by shot, Their own power was used to surgically and systematically dismantle their ability to fight. They were caught in a web of their own making. Explosions bloomed across the hardline fleet, but they were not the catastrophic detonations of dying ships. They were controlled precise flashes of light and energy. Main gun turrets melted into slag. Engine nacelles went dark. Sensor masts were vaporized. Within 10 seconds, the entire attack wave was rendered inert, their ships crippled adrift and utterly harmless. They were floating monuments to a failed ideology. Captain Valerius stared at his dead weapons console at the red lights indicating total engine failure. His ship was silent, the hum of the power conduits replaced by the shriek of damage control alarms. He had fired his strongest weapon, and in return, the enemy had given him a timeout. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning heat in his chest that was worse than any death. All hardline vessels are disabled. Admiral Jin reported, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on worship. No lives lost. They are neutralized. The bridge of the ledger was silent, the crew watching the display with wide eyes. They had just witnessed a battle won, not with overwhelming force, but with overwhelming intelligence. Open a channel to Captain Valerius, Rostova said. The lesson must be verbalized to be learned. Valerius's face appeared on the main screen, contorted in a mask of impotent fury. What is this witchery? He spat. If you mean to kill us, then do it. Do not mock us. There is no mockery here, Captain Rostova replied, her voice even and calm. Only a consequence. Your doctrine is built on a single, inflexible tool, the hammer of annihilation. You see every problem as a nail. I have shown you that there are other tools. There is the scalpel, there is the pen, there is the mirror. She leaned forward slightly. Your ships are disabled, but your crews are alive. Your data recorders are intact. The choice I offered you before still stands. Open your logs for audit. Account for your actions. Or you can drift here until your life support fails. Even a purist can learn new math, Captain. She cut the transmission, leaving him alone with his silence and his choice. Prax's synthesized voice filled the quiet. Admiral, I must note that my projections were incomplete. I calculated the probability of successful disarmament. I did not calculate the poetic justice. Rostova allowed herself a small, weary smile. Some things can't be quantified, Prax. That is why I am the Admiral, and you are the fleet mind. She felt the subtle shift in the ship's vibration as the power core began to stabilize, the excess heat slowly bleeding away into the void. It is the unquantifiable that wins the war. For 2 hours, the 7 crippled ships drifted in silence. Then one by one, their icons on the tactical display turned from hostile red to neutral white. Valerius, broken by a logic more relentless than his own, had finally accepted the terms. The hegemony fleet was no more. The ultimatum had been answered and its doctrine shattered. All remaining hegemony vessels have powered down and are transmitting their logbooks for audit. Jin confirmed a finality in his tone. Sanctuary is secure. Rostova nodded, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. Begin the process. Prax. Set up a joint commission. Use their own records to establish a reparation ledger for Sanctuary and the other worlds they have terrorized. We are not here to punish. We are here to balance the books. The institutional consequence, Admiral Prax asked. The first article of the surrender treaty will be this, Rostova declared, her voice carrying across the bridge. The Vexillum Imperium will formally and publicly renounce the doctrine of inflexible will. It will be struck from their military academies, and its use will be classified as a crime against sentient species by the Galactic Concord. This is now a matter of public record. The precedent lock was set. A tool of terror had been outlawed not by force of arms, but by force of logic. Their greatest weapon became their greatest shame. Rostova turned and walked to the large viewport that looked out upon the starfield. Below Sanctuary glowed a vibrant emerald and sapphire jewel, untouched and unharmed. The crimson slash of the hegemony fleet was now a scattered collection of white lights, quiescent and awaiting judgment. The mirror lattice, its work done, began to cool the faint shimmer of its energy fields, dissipating into the black. She thought of the choices made today. The risk, the cost, the fine line she had walked between teacher and destroyer. Her arc was complete. She had faced the ultimate test of her own doctrine and held true to it, using righteous decisiveness to enforce a measured justice. The fleet taught by numbers, and it had taught a masterclass today. On Sanctuary, the all-clear sirens sang. Alara, the schoolteacher, led her students out of the subterranean shelter into the warm, unfiltered sunlight. The children blinked, looking up at the sky. The angry red stars of the hegemony ships were still there, but they seemed different, quieter. The little boy with the toy starship pointed up. "Did the math work?" he asked. Alara watched as the last of the crimson lights on the distant ships winked out, replaced by the soft white glow of peace. "Yes," she whispered, a tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "The numbers are all in their proper columns." Admiral Rostova stood on her bridge, watching the last of the enemy fleet's threat lights extinguish as the public tally confirmed their full compliance. The intricate mirror arrays, their duty discharged, finally cooled from a brilliant weaponized silver to a quiet, unassuming pewter. She had held the line. She had honored the ledger. And she had taught a lesson that would be remembered not for the lives it took, but for the lives it refused to take. The universe was a vast and often brutal place, but today a small corner of it had been made to rhyme with reason. An ultimatum had been met not with defiance, but with a better question, and that had made all the difference. A doctrine of fear cannot survive a confrontation with a mirror. It can only break itself against its own reflection, leaving behind a debt that must in the end be paid by those who wielded it. A balance is not a punishment. It is a restoration. Their ultimatum was answered by the only force it could not defeat: consequence.